I know it's great. I see people change, who go to those meetings, go to the step meetings. And again, a lot of them express what you express. They say, I've been in the program so many years. And then, and just amazing how it all turns around. And it's that faith, I guess. What is it? Faith or higher power, getting out of the self, like you said, as long as it's not me. I think that's the answer, right?
I think a big answer is step 2, Bob, believing. Anything, if you're an alcoholic, a real alcoholic, that's the other big part, is we don't talk about real alcoholic, right? We don't do a real step 1 in the rooms of AA. We just say, come in and say you're an alcoholic and start chatting, right? Nobody learns if you're real. This program, the program of alcoholics, the old school program, if you want to call it that, was created for the real alcoholic. The real alcoholic, right? It's easily described. I'll help anybody go through the book and show you, right? You get to decide, needs a spiritual awakening. They need a God. They get to pick it, right? So they were taking the people that weren't real alcoholics out of the equation, and the ones that were real stay and find God and help others find God. That's what's really changed, Bob. Good morning, Bob. My name is Anthony, and I'm a real alcoholic, recovered alcoholic. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. My sobriety date is May 7th, 1996. This is the only time I've ever been in AA. I don't know why God picked me, but he did. And as you've talked about, and we've talked about before, and I've said many times, I've sort of had two programs, one program and one fellowship. So I come into AA and I am free from alcohol, and literally the obsession from alcohol almost from the day I got here in May of 1996. He took it right away from me. And I haven't been tempted or had the obsession or really thought about drinking for that whole time. We always talk about the difference between the fellowship and the program. So I did everything I was told to do in the fellowship, and I did the steps a certain way that I was told. I followed the directions precisely. And I had some type of experience, and I was blessed with sobriety. I think God just wanted me not to drink anymore, because he allowed me to act out sober while collecting, as we always say, cake and coins for about 18 years, being the group chairperson and running some events and taking on responsibilities and outgoings and commitments and all those things, but never really getting emotionally sober. And 18 years in, man, I got whacked with some emotional pain. I hit a bottom there. So, and then as of the last 7 years or so, after that pain, I was introduced to the big book and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and about finding and having a relationship with God. And my life has changed, and it's not all perfect, and there's still some issues today, but things are much better, thank God.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to this guy about the meeting. So I told him, I go by, like you're talking about, the big book, the steps. That's my program. The first few years I was in, I was, like you said, I was miserable, upset until I did the program. And he goes, no, I do old school, he says, right? To him, the old school was going to the meetings and not drinking, right? So I'm like saying to myself, am I old school or am I new school? He thinks I'm new school.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, if we look back on the path, right, one of the things I really like to look at, and again, something I never, ever, ever looked at till I started listening to Russell Spatz, was the path, right? We read it at every meeting, sometimes twice and 3 times, it feels like, how it works. And it starts out, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Now, we're not really paying attention in the meetings. I know I never was, because I got other things on my mind, more important things, right? But what does that line say? Rarely have any of the first 100 failed who thoroughly followed the path. And I'm going to, again, quote so many guys that I know, but Russell says 1935, AA starts, 1939, the big book is written and printed. And in between there was the path. And they couldn't have been reading the big book because it wasn't printed yet. What were they reading? They were reading scripture. They were reading 3 books they found to be absolutely essential. The book of James, 1 Corinthians, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You know, they were having quiet time. They were giving themselves to God immediately before going through with anything. There were hardly any meetings. That was the path. So I look at it today and I say, if I was paying attention, or if I really cared and they read that line, I would have ran up to the meeting, you know, chairperson after the meeting and said, so please tell me about this path, right? I don't want to fail. Tell me about this path. And I say this kindly, but don't waste your time. 99% of the people in the rooms don't know what the path was, right? And so I believe we're doing it old school way, right? We're trying to emulate what they did back in those days and take people through the steps quickly and learn about this path. And, you know, we're experiencing a lot of those things, 6:15 in the morning, Bob. I know you come there often, where we do the quiet time meditations and songs and readings. So I think we're old school. We're trying to be old school.
Yeah,
but we're just trying.
You could mention the meetings. We have the prayer meeting, like you say, the gathering in the morning, which all religions and faiths and meditations, and we even play
Everyone's
a
welcome.
song, you know, and we have the meditation. It's amazing. 6:15 a.m. What I'm going to do also is, with people listening, below in the description, we're going to put the schedule of all our meetings at
Oh, excellent.
BYOC, so you could just look down there and see it. But let me ask you this: the thing you're talking about after the 18 years, I mean, what happened, or why did, you know, how did it help you doing or changing or whatever you did? What was the, you know, what happened?
So the long and short of it is, you know, God sets things up the way he sets them up. But my sponsor, Joe, who had been sober for 30 some odd years and not found the program either, right? He hardly ever talked ever in AA, goes down to Florida where he lives half the year, and he comes back and he starts introducing himself as recovered, right? And I'm like, dude, you know, why are you saying that? We know we'll always be recovering. You know, that's what you hear in the rooms or the rehabs or the detox or whatever. But that's what's infiltrated into AA. So we're all recovering. You know, we'll always be recovering. And he kept saying recovered. And I was nervous. I was embarrassed. I saw other people were upset. So I asked him after a couple of times, why are you saying recovered? He goes, because that's all it says in our book. And I was like, what book? He's like, the big book. He goes, would you like me to take you through it? And I was like, yes. I didn't want to, Bob, but, you know, I trusted the guy, and he asked me to do something again. And I said, yes. And then, you know, when we sat down, he said, you're in a lot of pain. He goes, are you ready to find God? And I go, but what do you mean? Why? What is this God stuff? And he's like, you haven't been paying attention, because that's all this book is about. Right. And then he showed me the book, and the title page says, you know, the story of how thousands of men and women have recovered from it's on the first page, Bob. And that's all it says throughout the whole book. So I was ignorant, right? And my ignorance made me act silly. And I see that a lot today. But what happened was, I didn't know that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the steps were in the big book, right? I went to a few big book meetings over the years, and what do? We read 13, 18 pages, and I lose track after about a paragraph or two, right? So you want me to pay attention for 30 minutes of someone reading? He took me through. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, when first 2 years I came in, the steps were something just on the wall to decorate the wall. I didn't know. But you know, the thing is, like what you're saying is that, you know, and a lot of people they don't understand how could, like you say, a belief in God or whatever it was, how did that transform you? Or what, you know, in other words, what happened that you changed?
What happened was I stopped believing that I was still able to run the show, because nobody taught me that. They said, stop drinking. They said, go to meetings, right? The helping others and taking others through the steps, you know, in all the rooms I've been to, really not pushed, right? It's really become more of a place where you come and talk about your problems and yourself. And that makes us sicker. Who knew? It took me 18 years to realize I was getting sicker, not drinking. But through those steps, right? Step 12, having had a spiritual awakening, I had a spiritual awakening as the result, the only result of the steps, which I hadn't had before, right? And then it tells me the only thing that's going to keep me happy is helping other people, helping his kids, right? What does page 89 say in our book? Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. That's taking people through the steps, right? Whenever we bring that up, Bob, what do people say? They say, I got a commitment. I set up the chairs. I set up the coffee. I do it. Those are nice things in AA. They're helpful, but it's not intensive work. Intensive work is sitting down with someone and taking them through the big book, taking them through the steps.
Some people say to me when I talk to them about the steps, they'll say, well, I've been through the steps 5 times, you know, and like, it's like they said, I've done it, they've been there. But I think the difference is, as you're saying, probably going through it in a certain way through the big book, right?
Yeah, the book takes you through specific directions, right? And it says, if we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. So we get his spirit, God's spirit into us if we follow directions. And I like to say, you know, you say, people say, if there's 2 million people in AA, there's almost 2 million different solutions. And our book says there's one solution. So that person could have gone through the steps in some variety 5 times, right? But every time we take somebody through the book, we're going through the steps again. So that's why they tell us it's about, you know, that's why Dr. Bob couldn't stop drinking with just religion. He's a very religious man, right? But he didn't have the thing of, I need to help somebody else. And that's why he did intensive work literally every day. A person a day he averaged until he died. When you asked before, what was the big change? The big change is when I come to realize that if I'm going to AA to be entertained and feel better, which I can still do, right? I'm not getting better. When I go to AA to find people to help and I look to share the solution is when there's joy, right? And where I am able to forget myself as opposed to concentrate on myself.
What were you doing those first 18 years? You were going to meetings, right?
Yeah, but Bob, I was going when I felt like going. I was going like most people are taught when I didn't feel well, right? And then I'd come and I'd vomit on you. And you let me vomit because you guys like to vomit too, right? You let me vomit all my problems on you, all the stuff about my day, because you wanted to do the same thing, right? So what was I doing? I would go to meetings every so often. Sometimes I couldn't even stay, Bob. Sometimes I was so noisy that I would leave like 10 minutes after the meeting started. Right? I couldn't even stay in the rooms of AA because my mind was so, and I was sober, right? Quotation mark, right? It's almost May. I can celebrate soon, right? That would hold me off for a little while. I get nice cards and flowers and cake. But, you know, I would do some of those activities that they said. But I think the key to the whole thing is nobody's, you know, AA has changed that nobody's talking about this intensive work with other alcoholics, right?
Yeah. What did you like? What were your emotions like? In other words, in the first 18 years, you were depressed. What was it that you felt? And then how did that
going back and doing inventory, Bob? I didn't go to work on Mondays a lot during, I don't know, I'd say 2007 to 2014. I missed a lot of Mondays, like when I was a little kid in school. So yeah, there was depression involved, no doubt. And what else were there? There were idols, right? There were people idols. There were, you know, there was these distractions. Coaching was my big deal, right? And running the tightrope of arguing with umpires and finding a way not to get thrown out of games. And, you know, making uniforms was another hobby of mine. And, you know, for a while it was moving, right? I would move my family, my young family. And, you know, I've had to make amends to my wife about this, you know, numerous times. And my kids, you know, scared about money, right? Emotional security, insecurity, financial insecurity. And I would literally pick up my family and say, we need to move here because this is a better deal. This is a better deal. This will make me feel better. The whole time my clock is moving, so I'm not looking at myself.
So what is it like now? What's the difference?
Circumstantial, I've been at the same job since 2002, right?
Mhm.
I always say I've had 2 jobs in the last 25 years and 25 jobs in the last 2 years before I got here, right? Things have changed a little bit on that front. I'm married to the same wife that kicked me out in 1996. Do we have a perfect relationship? No, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but we're still growing. My 2 boys are of college age. They're both in college. One's graduating, somewhat successful doing what I'm doing at work, but that's not my real job, I learned, right? Today, it's different. Today, I wake up in the morning and I pray and I read and meditate. And then I get on a meditation meeting and then I go work and try to be in touch with people all day.
So
And
it's
at
a
night,
big difference. In other words, a big change, right?
it's not the same thing, Bob. It's not even close to the same.
I heard a guy say once, he goes, I'm in the same house. I sit in the same chair. I have the same job. I have the same wife. Before I was miserable. Now I'm happy. you know?
Yeah, same thing. Or Alcoholics Anonymous in time wise than I did for a year back before I got the program in sobriety. Right. So I was in AA, the fellowship. I would not do anything for days and weeks. Right. No prayer, not a meeting. Right. And now I'm from 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock, whatever time I wake up until 8 o'clock. The things I've packed in, I didn't do that for a year in some years of sobriety. So pretty amazing change.
That's something, right? One time I couldn't make it to a meeting. So I said, what am I going to do? And I sat down, I picked up the big book and I said, boy, I went to hundreds of meetings. I said, sitting here in quiet, reading this book I said, wow, I feel great. Because at the meetings, like you said, I go and talk about my problems. I felt good for the hour I was there. But when I left the meeting, the next 23 hours of the day, I was still miserable.
Yeah.
I didn't, I was what they call writing the problem, not the solution.
And we know that problem so well, we're experts on it.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a change. A lot of people, from everything you were saying, it's just, if I heard that when I first came in, I'd say, oh, that's a bunch of, baloney or whatever. And that, again, like it just seemed when I went to these meetings, the steps were there, but there wasn't, or the big book, right? What do they say? If you want to hide something from an alcoholic, put it in the big book, right? So I'm saying,
we laughed about that for years. I mean, it's almost comical that's funny. I laughed at it. I think I said it, right? You want to hide your money, put it in the big book. But think about what we're saying there. And I do want to touch on, that you were mentioning about the steps on the wall and that they'll do a big book meeting in AA and whatever it is. The way I view it today with open eyes is I would read whatever they were reading almost as a penance, right? I would go through those motions and listen to you read how it works. And sometimes, oh my gosh, the stuff they read before they start the meeting is so long, it's unbelievable. But I would do all that because there were promises for me in AA back in the day. You're gonna let me talk, right? So if you're gonna let me talk, I'll go through all this other stuff. I'm not paying attention, right? And if you read that stuff out loud later, when I'm thinking about myself, I'm going to probably get upset because I don't really like what it says in that book. So that's like the big change.
Now I heard something crazy. Somebody told me that you take people through the steps like in a short time. Like, what is it, like a year or two in that short of time, or how long is it?
Yeah, sometimes a couple of days, Bob, but usually within a couple of weeks.
Right.
The way they did it back in the day, Dr. Bob, all those guys, they all got sober. And Bill went through the steps with Ebby in a day. We read it. We don't realize what we're reading. Tried to do at BYOC is find people. And we started to do that, if you remember, and you were a part of it, a big part of it. For the Saturday morning meeting, we would do a step a week.
Right.
Right. We would go through the step study guide and or the book, and we would take people through. So yeah, we go through really quick. And that's the beauty. The biggest part of what we'll talk about, what we're going to talk about right now is BYOC, right? You tried, we all tried to get people to come. And the people in AA don't think that Alcoholics Anonymous is the program. So they would shy away, and people wouldn't come to our meetings at BYOC, especially when we want to do step work. And then COVID hits, boom, like that. Things get shut down. And Russell puts us on his email, and all of a sudden, BYOC's got people from Ireland and Russia
A
and
lot of times you
Japan.
were taking like 75 to 100 people on those meetings through the steps. You'd have it three, 4 times a week. You'd have the steps. You'd be going through them. Hey, listen,
Yeah.
when I used to go to those live meetings, if you want to clear a room, talk about the steps of the big book.
Or God, mention God, you might get some people
Oh, then
upset.
in the parking lot, people would approach me, they didn't, really, I'm being right. I mean,
I
you had
know.
that same thing. They didn't want to, I don't know. I was new school or old school. I think I was old school, right? So this guy's telling me, he's old school because he was talking about his problems, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, but you know what? You go back 2, 3 years later, people have the same problem. So it really didn't make sense. Although when I did the steps, like you're talking about, my life started to transform, right? Then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, it's just amazing. When like you said, it's about the higher power, God, of your understanding, whatever. But I used to make it me, right? All the time.
The whole world revolves around me. And we talked about it the other night on the fourth step. All I do is think about me and the people I want to assassinate so that I'll have less problems, right? Don't work on myself. Let's kill everybody so
I,
that I have less problems.
I like it when you go through the chapter there and you talk about, it says, explain that, I, me, my, and those, explain all that.
So I didn't realize this, but when we started to do the big book more, this is probably going back about 4 or 5 years, we were at a meeting at Falcha, and some lady came in from New York, and she was on the part Jim, and I think it's page 35, 36 in the big book. And Jim goes on this rant about how he drank. And the whole writing is I, me, my, I, me, my, I, my, me, my. We call it the I, me, my shuffle. And Jim gets wrecked, right? He just gets drunk on the milk and whiskey. And then later on page 40, Fred, who everybody loves, not a cloud on the horizon, he's I, me, my way more than even Jim does it. I, me, my shuffle. And the lady, and he gets drunk, and the lady said, if you're talking like this, or if you know people that are talking like this, be very aware, right? There's a reason. The only other time in the book is Bill at the beginning of his story speaks in I, me, my, and he's drinking, talk of suicide, drinking, talk of suicide. There's no coincidence how it was written. So she warned us, and I was excited by that. First, it bothered me, Bob. I didn't like it. I'm like, what do you mean you can't talk about yourself, right? And then I would bring that to meetings, and Bob, the next person after I shared it would go on the longest I, me, my rant I've ever heard, because they're just not listening, right? I already know what I'm going to talk about when I get up in the morning. I don't care.
They weren't listening, or they wanted to just get you upset.
Well, I don't think so. No, I think they already had their script from the morning, which was well rehearsed.
Right. But they were, but they did it more so than usual.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
oh yeah, that's the way they always shared, but I meant they really emphasized it then. But
Yeah.
and then you would go into the next part. It was more we, right? To explain, towards the end of the chat.
Well, the rest of the book is written in we, our, and us, the solution, right? The first 100, right? We, our, us. It's only those 3 guys. It's pretty funny, right? When you look at it, but there's definitely no coincidence. It's only those 3 guys, Bob, right? Jim and Fred, that speak in I, me, my in the first 164.
You know what
and
I
they
noticed
get bombed.
in the steps also, it talks about we, our, and it says, I counted once, it's like 15 times, and it says just that.
15 times. There's 9 gods in the steps, but we don't pay attention to that.
And you know what I noticed also in the steps, it never says I can fix it or I can do it, or
Yeah. No human power, no human power, no human power.
Yeah. All the way through, from the doctor's opinion to we agnostics. Yeah. It's so amazing, that first part of the book, just going through it. Have you going through the Dr. Bob and the good old timers, and they're going through Emmett Fox, right? You want to explain some of that, the Sermon on the Mount and stuff like that?
Yeah. So the path, if you're looking at that path that we spoke about before, the the best way to define it or to see the history of that path is through Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And it really explains what they were doing during those early years. And man, oh man, did we, and again, Russell turned us on to that, right? I was listening to Russell a bunch of years ago, and I got that book, and my sponsor and I read it, and they weren't doing what we're doing today. I will tell you that, but we're trying at BYOC and other groups now. Bob, before I get back to this, I just want to say, so many people now, and people like to credit BYOC. BYOC is just a bunch of people that are doing the big book. The big book is the star, a little bit of an agent. And, you know, we have so many sub agents now. And I don't even know if there are sub agents, but they're doing what we're doing. There was, you know, COVID and Zoom really, really, really spread the word of old school, if you want to call it that, Alcoholics Anonymous, where we couldn't really do that before. Now, I'll tell you, that's a great thing, but maybe in the worldwide population of recovery, we've gone from 1% old school to now a big 2%, maybe 3%. I don't know. There's a lot of fish. There's a lot of fish left to catch, Bob.
You mentioned quite a few times Russell Spatz. Do you want to talk about him a little bit, Russell?
Yeah. So I'll go through really quick.
I just want to say one thing before you do. I remember you brought this guy up from Florida, right? And you had him come to the meetings all in the area, and you said you got a lot of feedback on it. And this guy go ahead, explain what happened.
So my thing is I listened to some speaker tapes over the years, but hardly ever. And then as I started getting sicker, I needed something to listen to, right? So I think it went from Clancy and Chuck C, and then a lot of Sandy Beach. And then I listened to Peter M one time, Peter Marinelli, and man, he changed my thought process. He was talking about this book stuff. And, you know, that led me to listen to Joe and Charley, take you through the book. And, you know, Scott Lee, I love going through the book with him. And then I started listening to the Raymer brothers, man, oh man, Chris Raymers, Myers Raymer. And then one day I turned on Russell Spatz, and I'm listening to this guy talk about God and the path and the big book, and he's reciting it, you know, from memory. And I'm like, what is this guy talking about? Because I never heard anything like this. And I was disturbed a little bit, but I couldn't stop listening. And then, like he always says, at first you hate me, now you love me, right? It's, you know, that's sort of what happened. And, you know, he's got a gift. He's put on this earth to stir us up a little bit, maybe get a little under our skin, but to show it, he's been brave enough, and, you know, enough to talk about God and what this program is really about. And he's a good pal of mine now, which is amazing to me.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to put his contact information in description. So when people see this, they'll see our meeting there. They'll see Russell's meetings,
okay,
and so forth. Yeah. So what was the reception like when he came up here?
And right. Remember something. We, what does it say on page 191? Henrietta, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease. All I want to do is talk about it and tell other people, right? I'm 18 years in, and now I have this thing, which I didn't have before, and I want to let people know about it. Well, I'll let you know, Bob, they're not so quick to want to hear about it, right? Because they are used to a certain thing. And I guess they're staying somewhat undepressed and they're content with that. Maybe that's what I was doing too, right? But there's a new gig. So I'm like, can we get Russell up here? He comes up, and man, he gives one of his greatest speeches ever. A lot of people came, and, you know, I think it was a great memory. And then, like you said, I was able to take him to the Largemont group to speak, to Asbury to speak, to BYOC to speak in that one weekend. It was nice.
Well, you know, this is the question here. How come it changed? Like, why are a lot of these meetings not doing the way, you know, like you said, the way it was set up to be done? Why is it that these meetings, what happened? Right.
Good.
Get
so
to the prayer meeting.
The Use Act, a lot of people don't know about this. I was taught by my sponsor. The Use Act was a 1970 where the government decided that alcoholism was a disease, right? And then all of a sudden, AA, through recovery rooms, right, through rehabs and detoxes, which popped up on every corner because there was funding from the government, the money that they would never give us, Rockefeller wouldn't give us. We were flooded with money, right? And money became a business, right? The detox business and the recovery business is a big business. And everybody that was coming into AA now was getting a different message about recovery. And it's not about God, and it's not about doing the steps quick, and it's not about finding a higher power and working with other people. It's about more of a group therapy session every day. So, you know, that's transcended for almost 50 years, 51 years now, Bob. So it's a hard boat to turn around, but we're trying to turn around one fish at a time.
That's great. Yeah, you do a lot of service there. The BYOC is amazing. Like I said, I'll have all the meetings. And is there any other final thoughts you have or anything you want to say? Or I want to thank you for coming on and discussing everything. I know it's great. I see people change, you know, who go to those meetings, go to the step meetings. And again, a lot of them express what you express. They say, I've been in the program so many years. And then, and just amazing how it all turns around. And it's that faith, I guess. What is it? Faith or higher power, getting out of the self, like you said, as long as it's not me. I think that's the answer, right?
I think a big answer is step 2, Bob, believing. Anything, if you're an alcoholic, a real alcoholic, that's the other big part, which I'll close with, is we don't talk about real alcoholic, right? We don't do a real step 1 in the rooms of AA. We just say, come in and say you're an alcoholic and start chatting, right? Nobody learns if you're real. This program, the program of alcoholics, the old school program, if you want to call it that, was created for the real alcoholic. The real alcoholic, right? It's easily described. I'll help anybody go through the book and show you, right? You get to decide, needs a spiritual awakening. They need a God. They get to pick it, right? So they were taking the people that weren't real alcoholics out of the equation, and the ones that were real stay and find God and help others find God. That's what's really changed, Bob.
And then
should we chat about BYOC quickly and how it was started and everything?
Yeah, and then to also talk about the other different types of meetings there and everything. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, good. So BYOC is bring your own coffee. And a quick cute story. Who is today my current sponsor, Joe Sal. We would meet every Saturday from like 2002, and this was 2007, I believe. And I was headed for vacation. And he said to me, do me a favor. Go to meetings on vacation. Now, remember, this is still before we're doing the program of alcoholics, but he said, go to meetings on this vacation because every time you come back from vacation, you dump all your crap on me. He goes, it's not fair, and I'm not going to let you do it anymore. I won't see you on Saturdays anymore. So that was a good threat, right? He laid the law down, and I found some meetings down in the Outer Banks at 7:00 in the morning. It was actually 7:30. And I really liked it. And I pretty much went every day down there. And I came back, obviously, a little bit better than I usually do. And I was like, I wish we had a morning meeting. And he goes, so let's start one. Right. So we got in touch with my priest, Father Biglin, over at Holy Name. And he immediately said yes. And then for the next few weeks, we advertised and I sent out photos and fax and, you know, dropped off flyers. And 4 people came. Right. And I was like, oh, man, I don't know if this thing's going to work, but if you build it, they will come. And it grew over the years. And we're this little room in person before COVID, where you've been there. We get sometimes up to 55 people.
Oh, it was amazing. It was a small little room. And every time you open up the door, the whole room would get cold. I remember in the winter, but we had 60 people packed into that room. And tell me about the shares. That's the most amazing thing, how people won't believe how short the shares are.
Yeah, what we decided to do is we saw that one of the troubles with alcoholics is that we talk too much, right? I mean, we love to talk about what we know ourselves, and the Fellowship of AA has opened that up. So we decided that we would make a timer. And I think we started at 2 minutes, and because the crowd got more, so it's only a 45-minute meeting. We took that from the beginners meeting at Mamaroneck back in the day, which was very exciting to people, right? We love shortcuts. So we made it 45 minutes. And people were like that, right? You get there at 7, it ends at 7:45, you're home at 8. But the shares are now about 45 seconds. We do it on Zoom with a timer. Yeah, and everybody shares, Bob, every time you get
It's a
the
great,
opportunity.
you know
Sometimes
what
we finish early too.
I like about it, because you hear a lot of different topics packed into that one meeting. Whereas,
Yeah.
I think after somebody shares 45 seconds or whatever it is, the rest of it is fluff.